r/ask Reddit. What's a scientific fact that creeps you out? Caterpillars turn completely into goo in their cocoon and then become a butterfly. And there is evidence they retain memories from their pre-goo days. Memories of strong positive-negative stimuli that they show preference for / aversion to, even after metamorphosis. Pre-goo days. I love it. That so many vegetables came from the same plant. Broccoli, kale, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, etc. They are, botanically speaking, the same species. Humans have just bred them to emphasize different traits: buds, leaves, tubers. Imagine if humans were as genetically flexible. Imagine a person walking around with giant toes, but otherwise normal. Actually, plant genetics in general is a weird world. I mean, if we spent generations selectively breeding ourselves based on traits like giant toes, something like that could happen. Just look at dogs. Parasites can live anywhere inside of you. For years unnoticed, a simple migraine could be a tapeworm crawling in your brain, causing damage. Your eyes begin to blur frequently and you don't know why, and it's not getting better. Losing weight and having diarrhea, but it's not a stomach bug. Well, I guess it is. You are having a difficult time catching your breath and your chest doesn't feel right. It could just be some parasite hanging out, using you. Top 5 ways to intensify anxiety. Number 1. This post. Some mutations of just one letter in the DNA code can kill the fetus almost instantly, but some people live and have a seemingly healthy life while missing a whole chromosome. If you understand anything about biology, that's completely wild. I think mutations in cytochrome C are pretty much lethal, and cytochrome C has barely changed in millions of years. Your brain literally creates your own reality and your senses and body just go along with it. People think the brain sees what the eyes tell it to, but really the eyes pull up an image of blurry colors and dark spots and the brain goes cool, so that's a tree. You get and cure cancer in your own body thousands of times a day. The first eye that can successfully pass the Turing test would be able to pretend that it couldn't. That's terrifying. Most of the water on the earth will rain down at some point. The crappy fact about this is that the human body is 60% water, meaning that at some point the same water that runs through your body, the one on your blood, bones, brain, etc., will rain down at some point. We drink human fluid and the bedfish have sex on. Think about that for a second before your next glass of water. Doctors, scientists are barely keeping up with the influenza virus. It keeps on mutating rapidly. It really wants to get inside you. At least something wants to. There is more microorganisms on your body than people on Earth. There are more viruses on Earth than stars in the observable universe too. Thinking about how breathing and lungs work freaks me out. Once I start thinking about it, all I can think about is my breathing, and then I have to force myself to stop thinking about it. Thinking about it always switches my breathing to manual rather than automatic. Just how big of a number a mole actually is. That as the permafrost melts, a lot of locked up methane will be released, and microorganisms there will wake up and do their jobs, breaking down organic matter, and release more methane and greenhouse gases. And possible ancient diseases. A gamma ray burst could wipe out all life on Earth instantly with no warning. The sudden urge to jump off of a very high height. You can be physically and mentally stable to the greatest degree and still have this feeling when at such a high height. I heard it's the call of the void, and it's a normal human thought. The best example is when you're driving along and think, for a fraction of a second, about swerving into oncoming traffic or into a tree. Your brain is making decisions before you are even aware of the decisions it has made. It also makes decisions based off of learned behavior and you just go along with it. A study actually showed your limbs, fingers, toes, etc. react to stimuli before your brain sends the response to do so. Spider webs were used as bandages in ancient times. After being decapitated, there's still few seconds of brain activity that happen before you snuff out. I read this in the book Stiff by Mary Roach. I'm not sure how much I recall, or how correctly I recall, but two things stuck with me. Apparently they had to change the head catching baskets sometimes because the severed heads would try to chew through them. The other thing that stuck with me is that some doctor was experimenting with the heads right after decapitation. He would inject oxygenated blood into the heads and they would move their eyes around and look at him. That the only reason you are a functional human is that your DNA is so tangled that entire sections can't get decoded and screw it up. Actually better one. If you disconnect the halves of the brain and ask them to pick out something they prefer, your hands will disagree. What's your favorite color will result in one hand choosing red but one choosing green. Go look up split brain patients. For research purposes, how does one go about disconnecting the sides of the brain? We know more about the moon than we do our own oceans. It helps we can just look at it from thousands of miles away, but the bottom of the ocean takes a stupidly long dive. It's rare, but you can die at any moment for literally no reason at all. Your body just stops working. Just unplug it then plug it in again. The existence of prions. A fever is your body way of saying, we don't negotiate with terrorists. We either destroy the enemy or we die with them. Immune system. Haha, at 42 degrees C the bacteria will die. Brain. But we will die to FFS. Years ago I saw an episode of Monsters Inside Me where this guy was doing something outside and a fly flew into his eye. It only made contact for about a microsecond, but it was enough time for it to lay eggs. After they hatched they started eating his eye from the inside and he was starting to go blind until a doctor figured out what was wrong. Just imagine that. Getting your eye eaten from the inside and losing your sight all because a fly very briefly made contact with you. Ever since I learned about this I get really paranoid when there is a fly around my face because of the fact that this could possibly happen to me. When the Titanic sank none of the shoes decomposed so there's ton of shoes at the bottom of the ocean. Free shoes. A buddy of mine is a pilot for a major airline, in top 3 of airlines. I asked him exactly how much flying are you actually doing during a flight, like how much are you controlling the plane? He said about 5%. 95% of a flight is completely automated. He said he's involved a little bit on takeoff and on the landing but for the most part the plane flies itself unless something major happens in flight. The sun will eventually die out. When I was 10 I was watching the Discovery Science and I loved my science documentaries and this one was going on about how the sun will expand to a red giant and expand outwards and devour Mercury and Venus and all life on Earth will die and the oceans will boil away. No word of a lie, I had nightmares that night and I cried about it. Obligate Siblicide. In some species of animals, multiple offspring are born but only one is actually raised by the mother. The others are born only as backup in case the firstborn doesn't survive. When the firstborn is fine, which is the typical case, it kills the others. Apparently, the following statement creeps others out. Your bones are wet. The average number of legs for the human population is less than 2. Same could be said for arms. But I'll top your creepy fact with this one. The average number of heads per body is more than 1. That there are little crab-like things crawling on your face. So if I boil my face I have a lunch. Your skeleton isn't inside of you. You're inside of your skeleton. There is something called the squeeze, where when people had old scuba suits with tubes, you could actually get sucked into that tube if the pressure was off. You are literally shredded through your own breathing tube. A doctor once told me, on average every human has 3 anomalies, not all are visible. I was born with 6 toes on each foot, some extra nipples and a weird little dimple on my neck that apparently is a second throat. One of my grandfathers had a cleft lip, webbed toes and a couple extra kidneys. That's 3 anomalies apiece. Your family would be celebrities in the black market. Not exactly scientific or creepy but it's close enough and I want to contribute. Mouth pipetting was a thing in labs in the 1980s. A pipette is, for simplicity's sake, a glass straw that lab staff would use to transfer liquids. Nowadays we use special bulbs that when squeezed would suck up the liquid for us. Kinda like a turkey baster or eyedropper. Before we had these bulbs lab workers had to use their mouths to suck up the liquid, which meant if they weren't careful they'd get whatever they were sucking up in their mouth. I'm currently training to be MLAT and those fluids would usually be urine, liquid stool, sputum and so on. Yo, mouth pipetting is still a thing. Back in 2012, my school, in a flash brilliance, decided that rubber bulbs were a distraction and students would be fine sucking up liquids through non-sterilized glass. Think I sucked up acetic acid one time. When I got to college, the first thing they said during the safety brief was that mouth pipetting was an absolute no-no and explained in great detail how dangerous it is. Thank the Lord I've moved on to micropipettes. The mantis shrimp can see colors that our eyes aren't capable of perceiving. Think about that. What else are we just not capable of sensing? Ah yes, I am eternally cursed with nightmare fuel thanks to someone mentioning something like this in a YouTube video: 3. The human eye perceives different spectrums of light. For example, it can't detect infrared or ultraviolet light, and so we need special instruments to observe those. Which brings up an interesting idea: that feeling that you're being watched, even when you know for a fact that you're totally alone. Could it be because there are creatures standing right next to you, but they can only be perceived in a spectrum of light that we cannot observe? Due to relativity, it is impossible to measure the speed of light in a straight line. The only way we've measured it is by round trip with mirrors. For all we know, it could be instantaneous going one way and half the speed of light in the other, and it would be impossible to tell. I could be drinking the same water that my extremely far relative drank back in like the 1800s. I had a professor in college who said that if you weren't terrified about the concept of entropy, you didn't fully understand it. The grand scale and size of the universe never fails to instill Lovecraftian anxiety in me. Honestly, nothing is more creepy than how deep sea anglerfish mate. The deep sea is dark, and the anglerfish are spread very thinly. Therefore, when an anglerfish meets another anglerfish, it's incredibly important they get the chance to mate over and over again. The evolutionary strategy that deep sea anglerfish devise is extra creepy. The male latches onto the female, biting her and never letting go. That way he can inseminate the eggs she drops. Not that bad so far, right? But wait. How does he eat if he's latched on his mate? Well, the circulatory system's fuse and the female provides nutrients for the male through this fused circulatory system. The true horror starts here. The organs of males start to wither and atrophy, being absorbed into the female. Eventually, the male is reduced to a lump of testicles the females use to fertilize their eggs. Females are often covered in bumps of several males that have melted into the female, becoming a little body horror lump of meat on the female. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.